Good afternoon. My name is Michael Otten, and I'm a co-founder of a nonpartisan group of business and law school alumni called Reform Elections Now. Our core team came together 2 years ago after reviewing an analysis of the American politics industry by business executive Catherine Gale and Harvard professor Michael Porter on how the political process dysfunction is damaging United States global competitiveness. Our association is made up of Republicans, Democrats, and independents working together to seek improvements in American democracy, not to support partisan efforts. Unlike many other groups bombarding us with political information and disinformation, we are all volunteers and have never included the word donate in our communications. However, we do welcome the intellectual support of our members and those who attend these meetings, and those who can participate in the calls. We have a particular need these days for technology support if anyone has the skills and would like to volunteer some of their time. We welcome to today's discussion representatives from many other Harvard clubs, including the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, Florida, Ohio, Texas, Georgia, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and the DC area. Please do let us know, if you haven't already, which states you're connected with, as the most effective election reforms are made at the state level. I believe this afternoon's presentation will reveal some surprising potential scenarios for this year's election process, as well as ways to reduce risks. The presentation is largely researched and presented by Peter Cyrus, with logistics and other support from our core team of Herb Kaplan, Lucy Kennedy, Ron Randall, Bill Rosser, and Robin Weaver. There will be time for questions and answers, as well as an opportunity for discussion after Peter's thoughtful analysis of election scenarios. Please use the chat box to submit questions or comments. Herb will moderate that section of our call. And also note that there will be another discussion on August 26th, which is a Wednesday, same time, 5 p.m., which will be on the subject of the census. Okay, Peter, it's over to you.
Oh, I just going back. Okay. So thank you for attending. We're sitting, it's January 20th, 2021, and Chief Justice John Roberts calls Joe Biden and says, Vice President Biden, I know you have a large lead in both the popular vote and the electoral vote, but President Trump will remain in office in accordance with the 12th Amendment of the United States Constitution. So let's see how Judge Roberts got there. Well, Election Day is November 3rd, and at the end of the day, the major news services reported that Biden held a 9-point lead in the popular vote and predict he's going to win 349 electoral votes, 270 are needed to win. Then starting on November 8th, lawsuits are filed in the counting of mail-in ballots in 18 states, 10 Senate races, and 94 House of Representative elections. On December 14th, the electors in each state meet. Biden receives 242 votes. Trump receives 151, and 145 are still pending. So on December 18th, the state legislatures in each of the pending states meet and appoint electors in accordance with the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Republican legislatures in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, Iowa, and Texas, states in which Biden still has a popular vote lead, vote for a slate of electors supporting Trump. Now, you should note the risk of a constitutional crisis is heightened in states in which the legislature is controlled by the party of the candidates as losing the popular vote. Democratic governors in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania appoint a separate slate of electors supporting Biden. So you have two slates. And Democrats bring lawsuits in Florida, Arizona, Iowa, and Texas, claiming that Biden won. Now, on December 21st, the Supreme Court rejects the slates appointed by the governors and rules that the election should go to Congress for the final disposition as per the 12th Amendment. Now, if you don't know the 12th Amendment, it was ratified in 1804 after the deadlocked election, and Alexander Hamilton's intervention after the 35th ballot led to Jefferson's election and ultimately to the duel with Aaron Burr that killed Hamilton and led to the Broadway show. We're hoping that no one's going to be killed in duels over this election, although listening to the politicians on both sides, who knows? On December 23rd, votes are sent to the President of the Senate, Mike Pence. On January 6th, Congress meets in joint session, and no victor can be declared. Can somebody mute? On January 6th, the House meets to elect the president. Now, in accordance with the 12th Amendment, each state has one vote. California has the same weight as North Carolina. So while it would seem like the Democrats have a majority in the House, the Republicans actually control more states, 26 to 23 with Pennsylvania even. So with control of the majority of the states, the Republicans, the House of Representatives reelects Donald Trump. And even though there's still 10 Senate elections in dispute, the Republicans still hold the majority and the Senate reelects Mike Pence. On January 21st, Trump takes the oath of office. Biden and the Democrats stage their own event. Riots break out in major cities. The Army and the National Guard is mobilized. And just for fun, Putin invades Latvia and Estonia. Now, this may sound like a myth, or for Democrats, a nightmare, but there's a real possibility that the processing and counting of mail-in votes in 2020 could lead to such a constitutional crisis. First, let's look at Donald Trump. He has a history of challenging election results. He said the presidential election in 2012 was a total sham and wanted to march on Washington. He said Ted Cruz stole the Iowa caucuses in 2016. He wanted to sue over some Senate elections, especially in Arizona. And Trump is already signaling his strategy. He says there's no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than fraudulent this year. He's already sued the state of Pennsylvania over mail-in votes. And when they asked if he would accept the results, Trump basically said, look, these mail-in votes, they're going to rig the election. Now, Democrats and nonpartisan experts have disputed Trump's assertions, pointing out that there's little evidence of fraud in mail-in voting. And they may be correct. But what they miss is some states do not have the infrastructure to handle the vast increases expected in mail-in voting. And without this infrastructure, it could take months to count ballots. Many ballots could be rejected, resulting in legal challenges, and the final results could be delayed until 2021 or 2022. Now, even the Wall Street Journal, a noted Democratic mouthpiece, no, that's a joke, is editorializing about the threat, talking about the New York primary. Says it's a dark omen for November. And the Journal basically says Democrats ought to be working to make sure no one has an excuse to challenge the outcome. They should examine New York's voting mess and then take action. Otherwise, Americans might spend Christmas wondering which self-proclaimed president-elect will prevail in court. That's from the Wall Street Journal. When the Wall Street Journal warns that Democrats face a risk, Democrats should listen. Now, the New York primary was really the canary in the coal mines. And my guess is in November, we're going to have a lot of dead canaries. The mail-in votes in the primary were 50% of the total compared to 2 to 3% in previous elections. John Conklin, who's a spokesperson for the New York State Board of Education, said Astronomically high absentee ballots overwhelmed the system built to handle far, far fewer. The system is built to process 3 to 5%, not 40, 60%. It's not possible to change this process overnight. So here you have the head, the spokesperson for the board of elections saying, hey, we can't do it. And let's see what the director of the city board says. He says, the staff that we have is what we have. Everybody's working around the clock. The process of reviewing and counting absentee ballots is time consuming. Our technology is outdated. Hey, we can't do it. So you have the city and the state understanding the problems, but what are we doing to fix it? Now, for 6 weeks after the primary, ballots were still being counted. And 2 days ago, a federal judge ordered the state to count more ballots. These are ballots without postmarks. But there are also thousands of other ballots that were disqualified for missing signatures on envelopes or being sealed with tape rather than saliva. And a lawsuit has already been filed in the 12th district. God knows what happens if that's not settled by November. But even if the lawsuits are settled, primary results are taking more than 1 month, say 6 weeks. The final election turnout is 5 times that in the primary. 6 times 30, 6 times 5 is 30. Logic tells you that the final election results could take 6 months, 7 months. And current officials resign on January 3rd, leaving the seats vacant while the counting continues. Now, this is pretty scary to me. A large percentage of mail-in ballots in New York were rejected. In Queens, 25% of all mail-in votes have been rejected. In the 12th district in Brooklyn, the rejections are 28%. If 25% of all ballots are rejected, something's wrong with the system. Now, the League of Women Voters has already sued New York State over the high rejection rate. But if 50% of people mail in ballots and 25% of those are rejected, what it means is any candidate who loses an election by 20% or less will likely challenge that election in court, as is currently happening in the 12th district. And challenging an election could take 6 months to a year. Now, why are ballots rejected? Well, they can be rejected because of signatures. How many of you remember how you signed your name when you first registered? I mean, if I go to the polling place, I can see my name on a piece of paper and I can copy that signature. I have no clue to what my signature looks like on the polling place. Envelopes are not sealed. You put a piece, you put a piece of Scotch tape on it, your ballot's no good. Mismarked ballot. In Georgia, tens of thousands of ballots were rejected because people did not completely fill in the X's. And here's my favorite, missing postmarks. The ballots are sent in postage paid business reply envelopes. Only one small problem. The post office does not postmark these envelopes. So without a postmark, it shows up at the polling place and somebody says, oh, that's no good, it doesn't have a postmark. That it's easy to solve this. All you need to do is get the postmark to stamp it. But until it's solved, more ballots are being rejected. Now, there have been a bunch of previous elections that have been challenged over the counting of mail-in votes. In 1984, Indiana's 8th congressional district sat empty for 4 months while the court requalified 92 absentee ballots. In 2008, Minnesota's Senate seat sat empty for 8 months, over 6,000 challenge ballots. In New York's 14th congressional district alone, there could be more than 4 times that amount. In North Carolina, the district sat empty for 9 months over a Republican operative doing ballot harvesting. They had to have a new election. And as I said, in these races, there were very few mail-in votes. In a race where 25% of the mail-in votes are disqualified, you can have challenges all over the place. And each challenge could take 8 months to a year. And if there are a lot of challenges, the courts could be clogged, meaning the challenges could take a lot longer. So when will New York's elections be settled? November's elections could be delayed. Let's assume they're not. Counting could take 5 or 6 months. Challenges could take 8 months to a year. The results could take until 2022. Now, the good news is the New York State Senate and Assembly have recognized the problem and are starting to enact new laws. And they did pass a law that said absentee ballots without postmarks will be counted. They passed an earlier deadline for absentee ballots, and they passed a law that says the Board of Elections will inform absentee voters if their ballots contain deficiencies, such as, wrong signature or something. Now, only one small problem here. Right now, it's going to take 5 months to count the votes. Now we're saying that the people have the ability to cure their mistakes. So that adds another 3 or 4 months. So, and these problems are a step in the right direction. They're not going to solve all of New York's problems. But, let's look and see how other states are doing. 9 states should have no problem with mail-in votes. If you look at the chart here, excuse Hawaii for a second, I'll get back to that one. Most of these states have a majority of people who vote by mail. And Hawaii has voted to have everybody vote by mail and has been working on it for several years. And it's taken these states a long time to get their systems working, but these states have their systems working. Now, 11 states should be able to handle most of the increase. If you look, these states go anywhere from 20% to 31% mail-in votes in 2018. Having said that, in Florida, in 2018, the rejected mail-in votes more than exceeded the margin of victory in the Senate race. And if Bill Nelson had challenged Rick Scott, in court, that could still be going on. That election could still be going on. But we think in most of these states, they should be able to handle the mail-in votes, except for closely contested elections, such as the Senate race in Maine. Now, 8 states could have problems in a close election. These states go between 7.5% and 15.9%. And just as an example, Clinton won New Hampshire by less than 3,000 votes. The Democratic senator was elected by 1,000 votes. These kind of results are more than within the margin of error. These are the kind of elections that will be challenged in courts and seats will sit empty. Now, here are 9 states that could have problems. They have less than 7% mail-in votes. And Georgia has a terrible problem with its new in-person voting machine and 2 Senate elections this year. Wisconsin's primary was a disaster. Wisconsin is a swing state with a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor. Connecticut has no early voting. Texas could be a swing state. And in South Carolina, there could be a competitive Senate race. We have real concerns about these states. Here are the 13 states in the District of Columbia which have no clue. If you look at these charts, they average anywhere from 1.5 to 3.9% mail-in voting in 2018. And this year, they're going to go to 50% mail-in voting. Ain't going to happen. As an example, in all these states with 31.3 million votes, had fewer mail-ins than Utah alone with just 1.1 million votes. And in states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts have divided governments with one party controlling the governorship and the other party controlling the legislature. Kentucky, Alabama, North Carolina also have competitive Senate races. And given the limited experience with mail-in votes and New York's 25% rejection rate, many elections in these states are likely to be challenged. Now, let me just talk for a second about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a swing state. Donald Trump won by less than 0.75%. You have a Democratic governor. Republicans control the two houses of the legislature, even though the Democrats receive more vote. And winning Pennsylvania is critical to both parties. Sorry. God. Okay, that just shows you I have a phone. Winning Pennsylvania is critical to both parties. In the primary, absentee votes increased over 1,700% over 2018. Here's what I like. Donald Trump and the Republicans have sued the state of Pennsylvania over mail-in ballots in general and the installation of drop boxes in particular. The Democrats have also sued the state of Pennsylvania over mail-in ballots. When both parties sue the same state over the same issue, we have true bipartisanship. But when both parties sue the same state over the same issue, it becomes clear that there are real problems and very high stakes. Now, Pennsylvania made many improvements to its system, but it still took 2 to 3 weeks to finalize the results. In the word of one Democratic House candidate, it sucks. Now, some of the problems were related to volume, some were related to the voting system. These things sound minor, but they're not. Like in Lancaster County, the paper on some ballots was too light for the machine scanners to read. I mean, these are dumb things, but it's the way our election system works. So 1.07% of the absentee ballots were rejected for arriving late. That, as I point out, is more than Trump's victory percentage in 2016. In 2018, 4.7% of all absentee ballots in Pennsylvania are rejected. Now, I don't have the full numbers for 2020 yet, but the point is this. Pennsylvania is going to be decided by less than 4.7%. And if it's decided by less than 4.7%, whoever is ahead, the other party is going to sue. Now, let's look at the issues of sending, securing, processing, and counting mail-in ballots. Sending entails having the ballots arrive on time. Securing entails receiving the ballots at the polling place. Processing entails opening the ballot, checking the signature, the markings, the IDs, et cetera, and approving or rejecting it. And counting entails tallying the accepted ballots. Look, logic says mail-in votes should be the easiest. They arrive early. When they arrive, people can inspect and process them. They can inform the voters if they have a problem and then begin counting. Unfortunately, rules make securing, processing, and counting these ballots difficult, time-consuming, and rife with errors. Now let's look at the great USPS. One of the biggest concerns in mail-in voting is the mailing process itself. Ballots can be stolen out of the mailbox, lost in the mail, arrive late because of postal service delays, or rejected because they're not postmarked. So what is the new Postmaster General announced to reduce this problem? He's going to eliminate overtime, cut sorting by hand, keep mail not sorted until the next day, and reducing hours for employees. This suggests that whatever problem mailing ballots had previously, they're going to have bigger problems this year because the post office is going to have less manpower. Now, whether this is part of a political strategy that the administration has, I won't comment. Now, the next step is securing the votes. If you remember when we were talking about Pennsylvania, one of the things that I mentioned was that the Republicans, Trump was suing over drop boxes. States with all mail-in voting solve mailing issues by having drop boxes all over the place. In fact, while we refer to it as mail-in voting, in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and these other states, 2/3 of all voters don't actually mail their ballots back. They drop their ballots at a polling place or in a drop box. So in King County, Washington, there are 80 drop boxes. In Kings County, New York, 0. In Arapahoe County, Colorado, there are 30 drop boxes. In Queens County, New York, with 4 times the population, 0. Providing secure drop boxes limits the risk that a ballot will be stolen, lost in the mail, or arrive without a postmark or arrive after Election Day. Now, this is the second crazy thing to me. Many states will not process a ballot until Election Day. Some states, like Massachusetts, don't start processing until after the polls close, and New York now allows 8 days after the election for postmarked ballots to arrive. Now, one reason for not processing ballots when they arrive is that some voters may want to change their votes and vote in person on Election Day. We think this is, in this time of COVID-19, this is a luxury people can't afford. Most people know how they're going to vote, and states should pass laws restricting people who have voted by mail from voting again. You get 1 vote. If this is done, ballots can be processed when they arrive. This will remove much of the time pressure on Election Day and provide earlier results. Now, if 25% of the votes are rejected, shouldn't people be informed that their votes have been rejected? Shouldn't somebody at the election board call you up or send you an email and say, hey, you signed it wrong? Now, what's interesting is states that the states that have high percentages of mail-in votes or all mail-in, they handle this without a hiccup. But 37 states do not inform voters if their votes have been rejected. By not informing voters to correct their mistakes, you have much higher rejection rate, and higher rejection rates are going to lead to more challenged elections. Now, let's talk about counting votes, because it seems to me vote comes in, you count it. Most states wait until Election Day or when the polls are closed because they're concerned about results leaking. Not only is this a felony, but 9 states allow counting or inserting ballots into machines for counting well ahead of Election Day, and 5 more allow early counting, and you've never heard any leaks. So with the influx of mail-in votes and potential threats to the election, shouldn't states consider some form of early counting? Oh, this is a mistake, this slide. This shows you my training for the Ironman triathlon. I'm sorry it's in here. I have a plan to train for the Ironman triathlon in November. I'm 76 years old. I barely can walk to the corner, but at least I have a plan. That puts me way ahead of most states with no plan. The Republicans' plan is to call the election a fraud. The Democrats' plan is to tell people to vote by mail when they know or should know that states can't handle the influx any more than I can handle the Ironman. But there's some things that the states and the parties can do now. Let me get to them. There are 8 simple ways to avoid a constitutional crisis. Provide local and secure drop boxes where voters can deposit their ballots. Provide extra funding for the U.S. Postal Service during the election period rather than cutting funding. Process mail-in votes when they're received. Inform people if their votes have been rejected so they have the opportunity to correct their mistakes. Allow more early voting. Permit the counting of ballots when they're received. Hire more poll workers and contact appropriate government officials. Okay, providing drop boxes, it's simple. You have a drop box. It could be at a post office, a police station, a fire station, any government office. You just put your ballot in there. Nobody's going to steal it. And while states do not have time to purchase and test new voting machines, they can go on Amazon and buy some cheap drop boxes. Providing extra funding to the post office. I mean, the idea that during a period of time when when half of Americans want to vote by mail, it seems counterintuitive to cut the budget of the post office. I just don't get it. Reducing hours and forcing vote sorting by hand that leads to the kind of problems you had in New York. Congress is throwing money at people and corporations. The only place I can find that's got less money is the post office. So Congress should allocate more money to the post office so people can have confidence their votes will be delivered in a timely manner. Now, 3, process ballots when they're received. Be very easy, so it's going to increase costs of poll workers. Take the ballot, open them up, see if they're okay, and then inform people if their votes have been rejected. This is going to add some costs, but it's sure better than have 25% rejected and spend the next 3 years in lawsuits. Number 5, increase early in-person voting. Now, this is really critical. Voters and poll workers, many of whom are over 60, are concerned about COVID. States are concerned about the influx of mail-in votes. An easy solution is to provide in-person early voting in selected polling places. In-person voting allows the polling places to adhere to social distancing and people to cast votes without concerns for long lines. Many people will select early voting instead of mail-in voting. Now, some states like Connecticut don't allow it. New York has a limited time period. But we think every state should have 3 weeks of early in-person voting to allow people to vote safely. Now, number 6 is states should count ballots when they're received. Sure, there's some small risk of leaking, but all the states that that count early have had no problems. So why shouldn't other states count early so we can have the election so you don't have 2 presidents elected Christmas? Hire more poll workers. There are a lot of unemployed people around. You know, why should the government be sending everybody free checks, but they don't have the money to hire people to sit and review ballots? I mean, the cost of adding these people will be far less than the cost of a constitutional crisis. And finally, contact relevant government officials. Now, there are 2 groups of people. There's a person in each state responsible for conducting elections. In most states, it's a Secretary of State. But in some states like Alaska, New York, Hawaii is listed here, somebody else is appointed to handle the elections. And virtually all state legislatures have committees, election committees. So there's somebody in the state assembly and somebody in the state senate who's the chairman of the election committee. And we urge everybody to identify these government officials and communicate to them the importance of resolving election issues before we have a constitutional crisis. Now, in conclusion, this election is one of the most critical in our history. You have the presidency at stake, control of Congress, and control of many states. But it's also 2020 is a census year, so it's going to be the basis of drawing new political districts for the next decade. Our country is extremely polarized, and we're in the midst of a serious health crisis. Many leaders on both sides are concerned about a fraudulent election, and we cannot afford a disputed election at constitutional crisis. As we've outlined, there are simple steps to take mail-in voting function better and avoid election results that may be disputed for years to come. Our political leaders must recognize these issues, allocate needed funds, and take steps to avoid a potential constitutional crisis. Oh, one thing, I'm sorry, I skipped over, which is if you're going to vote by mail, and if you know people are going to vote by mail, tell them the day you get your ballot, put it back in the mail. If the mail is going to take longer, and if things get lost, just get it in the mail. We have a responsibility as citizens to influence our leaders to take the necessary actions to take actions quickly to preserve the integrity of our democracy. Now, you can keep this song, sing it, put it on YouTube or whatever, and you'll be a runaway success. Finally, just want to mention, this is our next presentation on the census, but I'll shut up now and turn it back to Herb. Oh, but I'll leave the song on there if you want to sing. Thank you.
So Peter's finishing now. Q&A.
Hello, Herb.
Just starting. Okay. As Mike Otten said at the beginning, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, go to the bottom of your screen, hit the chat button, and you can write your comment and or question, and then I will select them and call up various folks.
Okay, thank you.
One second. I don't see any questions. Maybe my
Well, I see there's been a request for copies of the presentation. That's certainly easy to do.
Request for copies of the page.
let me say, if anybody, we have a a few days ago we had 100 people. We have 30 on right now. If somebody has a question or comment, I don't see any hands raised or any chat comment. If somebody would like to make a comment or ask a question, please identify yourself and do so. And unmute yourself.
I think the person that's speaking has to not just unmute himself, he has to get closer to the microphone.
Well, this is.
I have a question.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just have a question. This is very, very depressing. What is actually what progress are you actually seeing with all these concerns, please?
Well, we're not actually trying to depress you. Although I do have, if you give me your address, I can send you some Prozac.
Your sense of humor might get us in trouble here.
Okay, then I won't send him Prozac. But what we see is actually a lot of very positive things happen. As I mentioned, for example, in the state of New York, the state legislature just last week passed all these bills that are really steps in the right direction. In a number of other states, the legislatures have stayed in session. They're working on these issues. I mean, I think, look, this has crept up on people. As Conklin, the spokesperson for the election board in New York said, we have a system built to handle 2 to 3%, and now we're getting 40 to 60%. And I think if you look at any business, if you're geared to handle 2 to 3%, and all of a sudden, you're the only store in town, you've got to make adjustments. Now, there are things that can be done. For example, how tough would it be for states to say, okay, we're going to increase more early voting? Go to your local police station and fire station. You have 3 weeks of early voting. So instead of seeing a 3-hour line around in places like Atlanta and Milwaukee, people can just at their convenience go and vote. I mean, there are a lot of things like this that do work. And it's just a question of the political leaders being willing to take some small steps to do those things.
By the way, I'd like to add that the weak spot in many locations that can be addressed at a fairly broad level is the poll workers. The poll workers are very often elderly and under the COVID crisis are reluctant to sign up to monitor or work at the polls. But young people are certainly available, but there needs to be pressure put because the process for hiring poll workers is not geared towards making it easy for young people to be hired from, I think in some states you can hire people to work at the polls that are over 16. And certainly going to universities or high schools even to get people to help out at election time ought to be a doable task. Doesn't require legislation, doesn't even require significant administrative changes.
One second, I just want to, okay, Doc, you have your hand up, you ask.
Okay.
Well, there was a question that Jeff Edelson wrote here.
Yeah, that's what
I'm very interested in the answer to that question because it's pretty makes sense to me.
Okay.
Go ahead, if you can answer that one.
Yeah, that's an easy, actually pretty easy one. The president's term ends on January 20th. Everybody else is January 3rd. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution says that, basically if the Electoral College doesn't settle things, it goes to the House where each state has one vote. Now, here's what the risk is. The risk is that there are a lot of lawsuits over House elections too. But it is the Speaker of the House becomes president if the president and the vice president are not around. Like the president dies, the vice president dies. That's how the Speaker of the House gets there. The Constitution and the election law of 1887 are very clear as to how this gets handled by the House and the Senate. So Nancy Pelosi is not going to be the president.
Can I elaborate a little bit on that? First of all, the electoral law, the counting law of 1887 is not generally considered very clear. The 12th Amendment is actually clearer. And if in fact there are not 270 electors chosen, which could be the problem, not so much if the states have two sets of electors, but if they don't have any sets of electors declared and they don't have 270 electoral votes, then it goes to the House with a 1 vote per state, so that 26 votes can determine the election on January 6th and legally basically elect a president with 26 votes, regardless of what the Electoral College did or the popular vote.
Yeah, it may actually not even be 26. It doesn't say 26. It says a majority. So you might have 3 or 4 states up for grabs. And they may not be able to vote, but
I assume if they have more than one representative that's clearly elected, that would be enough to give a quorum, because they need 2/3 of the states to have a quorum.
Absolutely.
But I think the risk is greater on January 6th than it is on January 20th. You could get to January 20th and the House Speaker could become the line of succession, but that's to me seems even less likely.
Yeah. Republicans, given the fact that the Republicans have a majority in the Senate and a majority in the House, it seems unlikely that they will, and given both the 12th Amendment, as Mike was talking about, the 1887 law, it would be very, very unlikely that it would get to that point.
Any other questions?
I had a question. Is it ever possible to volunteer to help count ballots, or is there sort of a group of people that are sort of allowed to do it and that's it?
Yeah, that's a yes and a no. Let's see if I can explain this. In each polling place, you have a Republican and a Democrat counting ballots. If there are more than 2 parties, you'd have somebody else. One of the problems is, and the answer is yes, it is possible, but one of the problems is these parties are very territorial, and especially in districts that they dominate. So, you know, so if you walk in off the street saying, I'll help count ballots, the first question is, well, are you going to be a poll worker or are you going to be a party representative? So there's two groups, there's poll workers and party representatives. And they all, you know, like any other organization, they have territoriality, which is a mistake because the more people they open it to, the smoother the process goes. In what state are you, Mary?
New York
What part of New York?
and Upper East Side.
Upper East Side. Okay. You know, I am sure that if somebody volunteered to the New York Board of Elections to help, they would, at this point in time, they would accept that. Yes.
I'm in Westchester. They're actively recruiting poll workers because quite a few of the traditional poll workers have already said that they won't work the polls. And if you look again at the experience, I think it was in Minneapolis where they had 5 polls open or instead of 200.
It was Milwaukee and it was 5 instead of 180, but
Thank you. Peter keeps us straight on facts.
Sorry.
The concept is right. I just get the wrong states.
Yeah.
And cities.
The other problem is the other problem is that we now have early voting. So they staffed for one day, but now there's, let's say there are 10 days of early voting. So in most places, people are looking for more poll workers, and both parties are looking for volunteers.
Hey, Peter,
another
question
thing
about
to-
early voting. If a state has early voting, do they have the voting at every single voting precinct or whatever, just so that you have the rolls of all the voters and make sure that people only vote once and all that kind of stuff?
Okay. Good question, Herb. So for early voting, there's a list in, you go and hit early voting, whatever state you want. Early voting, New York State, Manhattan, it'll show you where to early vote. It's not every single polling place. Frankly, a lot of the traditional polling places are going to be closed because they're in schools, which conflict with students. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of things going on this year. But there are early voting places every place, and there are. It's not as much as they're not as common as the regular polling places, but they exist.
But how do you ensure integrity then?
They are polling places, but they'll take, if in a town there are 10, if in a town there's 4 polling places, 1 will be open for early voting. And it may not be convenient. I voted early in this election. When I had my mail-in ballot ready to go, I signed it and everything. And then all of a sudden I said to myself, you know, I don't remember what signature I used when I registered to vote, you know, in whatever, 1960, 1962. I don't remember what signature I used. I'm going to go to the polling place. So I went to a polling place and that handled early voting, and I put my ballot in the machine.
Peter, you inspired me to take action as well. And I downloaded an application for an absentee ballot.
In New York State.
In New York State. Okay, when I got that form, there were specific questions as to why I needed this. I was able to qualify under one area. However, my husband wouldn't have qualified at all. I want to know, is New York State opening it up to anyone who wishes an absentee ballot?
Would you need a specific reason?
That's all over the place. For the primary, it did.
I saw that, but then I went to the general.
For the general, it hasn't yet.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, it's, it's,
Is it likely? Is it likely?
Well, I think I've heard that it's supposed to be implemented, but you have to apply for the absentee ballot 30 days, within 30 days of the election, which means you don't have a lot of time to get the ballot and vote, and you certainly want to get your vote in as quickly as you can.
I'm awaiting it in the return mail now.
yeah, no, I mean,
Oh.
this is, I mean, when I look at, an area like Queens and I see 25% of these ballots rejected, and then you say to yourself, well, how can you end up, I mean, I understand that in most of these areas, they're not very competitive elections, but there are areas, I'm out at the end of Long Island, and we have a congressional election here in New York District 1. It's going to be a very competitive election. If you have 10% of the mail-in votes rejected, they're going to be lawsuits.
I think the other thing people can do in every state is try to ensure that there's a good process in place to adjudicate those kinds of challenges and lawsuits, especially that they get it settled in less than a month or 2 months. Otherwise, you do end up with the 12th Amendment for the presidency or with congressional seats unfilled until 2021, 2022, as Peter's already described.
Yeah, and I hate to be critical, but the chances, if you look at the history, like the Al Franken, Norm Coleman Senate election, where you had 5,665 or 6,500 absentee ballots, or the congressional election where you have 84 ballots, 94 ballots. What happens is each ballot gets, they have to look at each ballot like it's a piece of evidence. And the history of doing this, I mean, once you get a lawsuit, you're stuck for close to a year.
Well, I think, again, if you go back to that law of 1887, I think the legislature is given an override capability that can basically override the adjudications.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you have all these states, the ones I mentioned, then the states like Kentucky with the Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, all these states where you have in Pennsylvania, in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, I'm missing one of them, but these kind of states, the Democrats, sorry, not North Carolina, but those others, Democrats won a majority of votes for the House of Representatives and the Senate, but because of gerrymandering, the Republicans control the seats. And you have Democratic governors in most of those states. So you're going to have, I mean, when you have two groups of voters, this was my analogy that, but if the governor appoints a slate of electors and the House and the state assembly appoints a state of electors, and you have two electors, one for Donald Trump, one for Joe Biden, I mean, this is a court fight that'll take generations. And it's the last thing this country needs right now. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the last thing that we need is an election which everybody says is a fraud.
Jeff Uttelstein has an interesting question. I'll read it. I had forgotten that the 12th Amendment states that a 2/3 quorum requirement for the House to select the president if no candidate has a majority of electoral votes. In the event that the House does not select the president by March 4th, the amendment states that the vice president shall act as president. So here's the question. Could state delegations stay away from the Capitol in order to deny a quorum? Might the Democrats prefer to do that and put Pence in the presidency rather than Trump? Is my understanding correct?
Yes. Your understanding is correct. And yeah, Mike, you want to say something?
Well, I think there is a question about what constitutes a quorum. It's 2/3, yes, but is it 2/3 of the representatives or 2/3 of the states?
2/3 of states.
If it's 2/3 of the states, if you have one representative for each of 34 states, then you have a quorum with just 34 people, theoretically.
The point is that you could have, you could have a bunch of states tied. You could have smaller states that are pro-Democrat, like Delaware. I don't think I don't think the likelihood of what Jeff brings up is going to happen. We only point this out to show the kind of problems that could occur. Obviously, nobody wants to see this happen. Whether, as I say, whether you're for Trump or for Biden, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the idea that can you imagine what things are going to be like when, if you go to March 4th, Trump is still in the White House, Pence comes to the door and says, "Okay, Donald, you move out now." I wouldn't want to be there.
Any other questions?
I think I do want to remind people that there are things to do between now and Election Day, and obviously there's less and less time to be proactive, but particularly in trying to avoid having this backlog of mail-in votes. That's, I think, the place where you're going to see the worst contention. And I think it's also focused on the states where there is a difference between the political makeup of the governor versus the legislature. Those are the states where the biggest issues can occur and where there isn't a decisive victory for one party or the other.
And I have a question. What about the digital vote?
The what, Jesus?
Digital. To be able to vote from my computer at home or from my smartphone.
Okay.
And to have all the biometrics set up. Other countries are doing.
It's the word that you use there, the biometrics, is a great word. The fact of the matter is that the technology is available to make a vote secure. There is no reason to believe that with the right biometrics and everything else, that we couldn't have a system where everybody voted, if you can vote on America's Got Talent or some of these TV call-in shows, you can vote for president. But each election is run by the states, and within each state, it's run by the local counties, and the chances of getting a national system such as the one that you just discussed are zero.
It's a platform to be made available. It shall be able to be incorporated and instituted as a non-profit, and it can make crossings of biometrics for validation purposes with the passports biometrics. If you have a passport, you have already granted use of your biometrics to the government, and in other countries they are, kind of cross-checking the biometrics of every individual in this in the elections. So we are very behind in the U.S.
No, you could not be more correct. And the problem, as I say, is that in Texas, I know we have a couple of people from Texas. Each county decides, we are. in other countries, there's a national system where they invest in the system like the one you described. Where do you live, Jesus?
I live in the US and Mexico, and I spend a lot of time as well in Latin America. So I understand different jurisdictions, and my wife participates in politics in Mexico. So I kind of can compare both systems. And what I can tell you is that building a platform today is relatively inexpensive, and it can become a non-profit organization that provides as a third-party outsourcer the services to these municipalities. And these municipalities are going to have a much cheaper way to organize their taxes.
You know,
And their voters.
100%. You know, look, even just to get back to mail-in voting, even the states that have all mail-in voting without you know the app that you're talking about, they save a substantial amount of money. Colorado has saved 40% on election costs by not having polling places. What you suggest makes such perfect sense. And the reason that nobody's doing it is that all the people in local areas like to have their own power.
Well, I think one of the, coming back to the somewhat pessimistic statement that someone made earlier in the call, one of the good things that comes out of a crisis is usually enough focus to make some improvements. And while I think we're definitely going through a critical election year, we're likely to have quite a bit of chaos and disruption no matter what happens. But hopefully people will not just forget it on January 20th, but will try to start instituting constructive change and recognizing that our election system needs serious work. And it's not something that we should just walk away from and leave it for another 4 years. So yes, there's short-term strategy things we can do between now and November 3rd. There are things that can be done between November 3rd and January 20th. And then there's a lot more that can be done in 2021 and 2022, working up towards the next elections. Do we have any other major comments or questions? We certainly welcome comments as well as questions if anyone else would like to add to the conversation.
I think I might ask Peter if you'd say a few words about the program that we are planning for Wednesday, the 26th, dealing with the census and how critical the issue is.
Well, just briefly, what's happened with the census is the census started late because of COVID. Now the president has decided to end the census early, primarily because he doesn't want certain people counted. And so what's happened is that at the moment, we have a huge undercount on the census. In New York, for example, well, I'll use myself the census asked me where I was on April 1st. I live in New York City. I pay taxes on New York City. On April 1st, I was in East Hampton, New York. So I filled out the census that I was in East Hampton, New York. I'm down as an East Hampton, for the purpose of the census, I'm an East Hampton resident instead of a New York resident. But on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, you have the lowest census reporting, the highest undercount of any place in the United States, because people either weren't answering their door or they were in Florida, wherever. And so the issue with the census is the census does two things. The first thing it does is allocates legislative seats, not just in Congress, but in state legislatures. The second thing it does is allocate is money is allocated based on the population. Over a 10-year period, it's $15 trillion. And the issue is, I mean, there are interesting issues. Do you count illegal aliens? It doesn't, the law is not clear. It says people, doesn't say citizens, it says people. So do you count all illegal aliens? Do you count a resident alien who pays taxes? Who do you count? And because whatever number they come up with in the census is going to be with us for a decade. Whatever mistakes, if some area has 20% less people because they were all away or because they were scared to open their doors, and 40% of people who were polled said they would not open their door to a census worker. So what that says is there are going to be huge undercounts in certain places, and that's going to affect representation, and that's going to affect expenditures for the next decade, and that's going to lead to 10 years of fighting over what's a real number.
Peter, I think that's enough. Otherwise,
I'm stopping.
You're going to lose people tuning in on the 26th. So I'm sure you'll have more insightful things to talk about. Since in the last minute there has been another question, and I'll read it. The question is from Guy or Guy. I don't see a last name. The 20th Amendment, Section 3, will also come into play if the Congress allows the March 4th deadline to be met without a selection. That does not preclude a president being selected even after the vice president became the acting president. Comment on that?
Yes. Answer is yes. I mean, yes. We don't want to go. We don't want to go there. What I mean, we don't want to go there is that there are all these different amendments that could come into play based on what happens. And I do see another question from John, who says, by what authority is the census being ended early? And it's the authority of Donald J. Trump.
And does he have well, we don't really want to get into a big...
Yeah, no. Donald Trump, just to be clear, the House of Representatives passed a bill extending the census. It was supposed to be October 31st. Trump cut it to September 30th. The House passed a bill extending it to April 30th, 2021. The Senate has refused to vote on that. So if the Senate and the House voted to extend the census to say April, and there's no need for the census to be completed on a particular date. The only need is to have it ready for next year for redistricting. So if the Senate tomorrow came in and said, we're going to vote for it, with the House already having voted for it, it would be extended.
Okay. Mike, do you want to make some concluding comments?
No, I think we covered it all. I appreciate the people who've attended. I do hope that you won't just give up in frustration, but try to reach out to people you know in the media, people you know in states that are clearly going to have closer elections and therefore have more contests. And also try to figure out with your local administrators of elections how you can be helpful to make it go as cleanly as possible in your district. So I hope we will see you again. Feel free to communicate with any of our core team or to join as members and contribute more of your intellectual power to our efforts.
We're not looking for money, just...
We're looking for minds, not money, but most important of all, stay well.
Now, thank you for coming, everybody. If we don't have your email address in our database, then we can't communicate with you for the upcoming program on the 26th. So if there's any question, you can go to our website, reformelections.org, and there is a place to subscribe and leave your email address to be sure that you're on our list.
It's Reform Elections Now.
Electionsnow.org.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you for tuning in.